Hello, everyone. Hope you all are having a great day and welcome to another episode of the Big Game and Box Score podcast. As always, I'm your host, Cole, joined by my co host, Brian.
What's going on, everybody? In today's episode, we'll be making our predictions for the Big 12 Conference, and we will also be going over our top five quarterbacks in college football.
Yes, indeed. This week's episode, we will be starting a four-part series where we make our predictions for each Power Four conference and our top five players at each position.
Yes, sir. We appreciate everyone for tuning in, being a part of our channel. If you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe and also make sure to like this video, as it will greatly help our video do better in this YouTube algorithm.
Indeed, those two things would be greatly appreciated. Also, be sure to comment down below who is your pick to win the Big 12 and who are your top five quarterbacks going into this season. All right, so this is how it's going to work. Brian and I will cover the following: who our favorites are to win the Big 12, who in the Big 12 we think is a contender to make the playoffs, who the dark horses in this conference might be, who in the conference is most likely to improve from last season, who in the Big 12 is most likely to regress from last year, and finally, who our pick to win the conference is. Now, with all that out of the way, let's get on to our predictions. All right, starting out with my favorite to win the Big 12, it is the Texas Tech Red Raiders. This team may have lost 9 NFL draft picks this year, but they returned 16 starters if you include the guys that they got out of the transfer portal. Starting off with the unit that was the strength of their team last year, their defensive line. Even though this defensive line will not be what it was last year with, number 2 overall pick David Bailey, it won't be far off from last year's defensive line. Joey McGuire says that a few of these guys will be NFL draft picks in 2027, including the two guys off the edge, Trey White and Adam Trick, and Anthony Holmes in the interior. Their linebacker room, despite losing Heisman contender Jacob Rodriguez, who was the only guy that linebacker room lost, is returning everyone else, along with adding a couple transfers, including Austin Romaine, who was second team All Big 12 last year. As for Tech's secondary, while they will be by far the position group that regresses the most on their defense, they will still be good with their secondary being headlined by guys like cornerback Bryce Pollock, who is expected to be a high NFL draft pick next year. Now, as for their offense, while they do lose 2 starters on the offensive line, they return everyone else, plus adding in a few transfers. Good old Joey McGuire thinks that this might be his deepest offensive line yet. They also returned their 3 running backs in Cameron Dickey, who was a 1,000-yard rusher last year, Jacoby Williams, who rushed for over 800 yards last season, and Quentin Joyner. This running back room, for me, is among the best in the nation. While they do lose their 2 leading receivers to the NFL, Tech returns 2 wide receivers that had over 500 yards last year, and they add in a few transfers, including Jalen Jones, who had over 1,100 yards last year at Alabama State, Malcolm Simmons from Auburn, and then Dante Lee from Pitt. By far, in my opinion, what's going to be the weakest part of this team is their quarterback play. But however, Will Hammond was so talented that even if Hammond's just average, this team could still easily win the Big 12.
Conference favorite for the Big 12 is the Texas Tech Red Raiders. I think this team is very well organized from top to bottom. I think they got a really, really strong roster, highlighted by an offense. How highlight? They got a really underrated offense. I think obviously the defense is being talked about a lot because all their whole D line transfers, including Mateen Igbarogba, Bryce Butler, Trey White, and Adam Trick, which I think could be one of the best D lines in college football, and adding Austin Romaine, who was an incredible linebacker from Kansas State. They're gonna have a lead front seven, but also one thing to note is they do have a really good set of weapons with, of course, Terrence Carter, who is 1A, 1B, 1C for the best tight end in college football, alongside Coy Eakin and Micah Hudson returning from last year's roster, highlighted by a great backfield with Cameron Dickey, Jacoby Williams, and Quentin Joyner. I think that's going to be a really solid trio. And if we can get even, if Will Hammond can at least be 85, 90% of what Beren Morton was, and can step up in the big games, unlike what Morton was able to do last year, which I think he can do. I'm a big believer in Will Hammond. I like him a lot, especially learning behind Morton and of course being in Joey McGuire's second year in the system. I think he's going to be in for a solid second season. I think if he can get going, these Raiders, they will be a team to look out for.
All right. Glad we're on the same page. Outside of, you thinking Baron Morton was a competent quarterback, that guy,
He wasn't competent, but let me say, I think Will Hammond will be significantly better. Let's be honest.
yeah,
I think he can
yeah.
get.
Anyway, moving on to the teams in the Big 12 that I have as playoff contenders. If you watched our episode last week, you'd probably know who these three teams that I'm about to say are: BYU, Utah, and Houston. Now, all three of these teams have one thing in common: they return their starting quarterback. And while Utah and BYU return their bell cow running backs, Houston adds their own bell cow from the portal in Makai Hughes, who did rush for 1,400 yards at Tulane in 2024, but then had a down year at Oregon where he was injured and then lost his job to the younger running backs. I think he has a bounce back year this year at Houston. All three of these teams are also looking like they're going to have good defenses this coming year. And while all three of these teams are not as talented as Tech, I do think that any one of them are capable of giving them a run for their money whenever they play them this coming season.
Alrighty, and crazy enough, as my three playoff contenders, I also have BYU, Houston, and Utah. First thing I gotta say, I was very disrespectful to the Utes in the last video. I did not. I've always continued to underrate Devon Dampier. I think Devon Dampier is one of the most productive college quarterbacks in college football right now, and I just continue to underrate him. And even though he's not the best pure passer, he is an incredible playmaker, incredible runner, incredible getting outside the pocket. He's an absolute stud. And even without Kyle Whittingham, who is now obviously with my Michigan Wolverines, go blue, I think he's still gonna be in for a major, major season. And then of course they bring back their bell cow back and Wayshawn Parker, plus a solid set of receivers from the portal. Another thing, and so I really think this team is, I actually think this team will be very much similar to what they were last year. And then similar to BYU, I think BYU's got an excellent, well-rounded team. I think, of course, and one thing I will say that I do think that I didn't really touch on last time is I do think, oh wait, I know I think their defense could also be a really solid unit. I think their defense will actually be maybe could easily improve from last year's unit, and that can make for this team to be a very scary team. And of course, I also have Houston, who I think is really like Willie Fritz has got these guys in the right direction. Of course, they have one of the most underrated receivers in college football, in Amari Thomas. Um, Plus, they got some really good. This is the portal. Plus, Makai Hughes, I think, was a criminally underrated pickup as he didn't really get used at Oregon last year. I think he's still a very talented running back, returning with Willie Fritz, where I think he's going to explode. And if Connor Weigman can continue to improve, I think this team's going to be in for a big year as well.
And now on to who I have as a dark horse in the Big 12 conference. That team being the Arizona Wildcats. Now, starting off with the most important thing for this team is the return of Noah Fifita. After having a bounce back year in 2025, he returns for his senior season with the lost production on this offense around him from last year being replaced through the transfer portal. Arizona's defense might take a little bit of a step back, but will still be good. Now, the tough thing about this team is that they play a really tough schedule, at least for Big 12 standards, as they play at BYU, at Texas Tech, and versus Utah. While they are most certainly not going to win all three of these games, heck, they most likely won't even go 2 for 3. I could definitely see them upsetting at least one of these teams and going 10-2. And if the top four teams that we were talking about just earlier lose a couple unexpected games, then who knows? Arizona could probably find themselves in the Big 12 championship.
Alrighty, as for my dark horses, I actually have two. First one is Oklahoma State. I'm telling you, do not sleep on the boys this year. They had a completely new roster overhaul. Just call them the North Texas Cowboys at this point, as they hired Eric Morris from North Texas, who was excellent last year. In comes the entire North Texas starting offense from last year to Stillwater. And this, I think these guys are going to be in for a major improvement year. Now, I don't know how much of a playoff contender they'll be, but like 7, 8 wins are easily possible with these guys for sure. You got Drew Mestemaker, who is an absolute gunslinger. This guy threw for over 500 yards in a game last year. You got Caleb Hawkins, who I think is one of the most underrated running backs and underappreciated running backs in college football right now. And of course, you got the entire rest of the offense, which is including Diamond Green, Wyatt Young, Justin Bullock, and Chris Barnes, all really solid weapons for Messamaker that they were last year. And you look at this team's schedule, and it's really not. I mean, obviously, for it being the Big 12, it's actually pretty easy, but it's not too bad. But here's the thing: you got a couple interesting games. Of course, going at Houston is not, and hosting Texas Tech aren't easy. But hey, who's to say this team can't win 8, 9 games this year? I really think it's possible. I'm a big Eric Morris believer, and I'm excited to see what the boys do in Stillwater this year. And then my second team, I have Colorado. This team was built on a lot, actually. And of course, Julian Lewis stepping in at quarterback. Plus, you got DeAndre Moore from the Texas Longhorns, Joseph Williams, Danny Scudero. That's a really good receiving core. Of course, picked up Richard Young in the portal too, and they have a whole new defense in the transfer portal. Even though I'm not the biggest believer in Deion Sanders, I don't think Deion Sanders. I think he hasn't really proven like to take that next step yet. I'm not the biggest believer in him, but this roster itself is easily good enough to make a bowl game.
All right, now moving on to the teams in the Big 12 that we think are most likely to improve from last year. Now, one of the teams that Brian was just talking about, or not completely indifferent. I'm partially indifferent to Brian. I'm actually indifferent to Brian about both teams, but I'm going to be talking about one of them in this upcoming segment. For the team that I think is most likely to improve from last year in the Big 12, I have the Oklahoma State Cowboys. Now, let me start off by saying this. It can't get too much worse than going 1-11 and 0-9 in conference play. It really can't get much, if any, worse at all. While Oklahoma State isn't a threat to win the Big 12 in any way, heck, I doubt they finish even in the top half of the Big 12, I can guarantee you they will improve from last year. After firing head coach Mike Gundy 3 games into the season, shout out Mike Gundy, by the way, legend. I'm a man, I'm 40 meme will forever live on. Oklahoma State brings in former North Texas head coach Eric Morris after he went 12-2 at North Texas last year. Morris also brought a lot of top talent with him from North Texas. Quarterback Drew Mestemaker, who threw for over 4,300 yards last season. running back Caleb Hawkins, who rushed for over 1,400 yards last season. And they also brought in North Texas's top three wide receivers from last year. All this to go along with the offensive line and defensive transfers that they also brought in from other schools. Oklahoma State in total brought in 56 players from the transfer portal. While I don't see Oklahoma State winning more than 5 or 6 games, maybe 7 or 8 if they're lucky, they're definitely inevitably going to improve from last season, at least in the win column, because as I said before, it doesn't get much worse than 1-11.
Alrighty, I have three teams that are bound for progression this year. Is very likely to progress, and that is the Arizona Wildcats. And now I don't know how much their win total is gonna improve, but like Cole said in his dark horse section, I think this team vastly improved. Plus Noah Fafita, he's gonna continue to garner some more gradual experience. He enters in his senior year. I think he's gonna be in for his biggest year of his career. Even though obviously, of course, early his career had Tet McMillan, who's now a very productive wide receiver for the Panthers. I think he's still got a really solid set of weapons. This includes Giovanni Richardson, Chris Hunter, and Trey Spivey all returning, plus Cole Rusk from the University of Illinois. That's a really solid group of weapons. And of course, they had four transfers on defense. I think these Wildcats could be in for like at least an 8-9 win season. And like Cole said, you never know. Maybe they'll make a run for the maybe they'll make an underrated run for the Big 12 conference. My other two teams are very less likely, but I have Arizona State and TCU. And big reason why are their coaches. Like the rosters are not bad, although Arizona State, I'm a big Mikey Keene guy, of course, because go blue. And of course, they did pick up a Marion Miller in the transfer portal. I think is going to be one of the top receivers in the draft. Six transfers on defense, so I think they're going to be in for a major year. And I'm a big Kenny Dillingham guy. I think he's going to. I think I would not be surprised if these guys win 7-8 games this year, maybe even more. And then of course you got TCU, big Sonny Dykes guy. Of course he of course has been to a national championship, so he knows how to win. They got Jaden Craig coming over from Harvard, who I think it's going to take a little while, but I think towards the end of the year we could see him catch some fire. And then of course they got a pretty solid receiving core with Ed Small, Jordan Dwyer, and Jeremy Scott. And then three transfers on defense. I think the Horned Frogs are going to be in for at least a one or two more wins than they did last year.
Alrighty. And now for the Big 12 team that I think is most likely going to drop off from last year, I have the Iowa State Cyclones. After the departure of Matt Campbell and a majority of their roster last year, you might as well call them the Penn State Cyclones over there. This looks to be a rebuilding year for the Cyclones. They only returned 3 starters from last year's team, and to make it worse, they only brought in the 68th ranked transfer portal class. Yikes. While new head coach Jimmy Rogers did bring in 15 players with him from Washington State, not many of these guys were starters. It would honestly shock me if Iowa State didn't finish this season with a losing record. That's how low I view the Cyclones this season.
All right, so I have two teams that are bound to regress this year. First is St. Louis Cole, the Iowa State Cyclones. Everything he said is very accurate. I don't see his team coming out of this year with a winning record. They got they got a lot of guys from the portal, obviously, because they lost everybody from the portal to Penn State, because now I guess they're gonna be called the Penn State Cyclones now. Maybe we'll see. They might rebrand. I don't think so, but anyway, they got a lot of guys from the portal. Obviously, pretty much their whole roster in the portal because they only had like 4 or 5 like stars return, and then. Jalen Rayner now steps in as their new quarterback. I like Jalen. I mean, he had a few decent plays at Arkansas State, but going from the Sun Belt defenses to the Big 12 defenses, very big adjustment. And of course, he struggles a lot as a passer. So I'm not really sure. This team's ceiling is very low, like to break even, like with 6 wins. But I don't see his team winning more than like 4 or 5 games this year. I think it's gonna be a really down year for them. And then I have the Cincinnati Bearcats as they lost their gambling phenom Brendan Sorsby. And I think they don't. And I did not think they really retooled their roster that well. Their new quarterback is J.C. French from Georgia Southern. Yeah, another Sun Belt quarterback. Not great when you're moving when now you're in the Big 12. It's a bit of an adjustment, but hey, I mean, crazy things have happened, but I just don't see the Bearcats having a very successful season. Same thing about 4 or 5 wins for them.
All right. And now, finally, for the final part of this segment, is our picks to win the Big 12. My pick, if it wasn't obvious before, is the Texas Tech Red Raiders. As I stated before, this team is just so much more talented compared to the rest of the conference. Like, genuinely, all of their position groups are easily top five in the Big 12, except for maybe quarterback. Like, this team is so talented that Will Hammond would have to put on his best Baron Morton impression for me to not be all super confident about them repeating as Big 12 champions.
All right, and now I have my pick to win the Big 12 this year, and it is the Texas Tech Red Raiders. Yep, like I said, this is by a pretty wide margin is the most talented team in the Big 12, man. And of course, it really does come down to quarterback Will Hammond. And I mean, Baron Morton was, we all know he was terrible in the big games. And even if Hammond is bad in the big games, I still think it's pretty easily going to be the Red Raiders coming out on top with the Big 12. Yeah, although I am a little bit higher on Will Hammond, I still think the Red Raiders take home the Big 12.
All right, now on to our other segment of this episode, and that is Brian and I's top five quarterbacks in college football.
As all sports fans know, the quarterback is the most important position in football, if not the most important position in all sports.
Right, you are, Brian. Having good quarterback play is necessary if you want to win at any level in this sport. I've said this to a great many people. You can overcome bad wide receiver play, you can overcome bad offensive line play, you can even overcome a bad defense, having a bad defense, but you cannot overcome bad quarterback play. It's just simply not possible.
Indeed. The quarterback is also the guy who receives a majority of the credit if his team wins, but also a majority of the blame if his team loses.
Spot on. Now, this is how it's going to work. Brian and I will reveal our top five quarterbacks from one all the way down to number five, and then we will discuss honorable mentions afterwards. All right. And coming in as the best quarterback in college football for me, I have Trinidad Chambliss. Does anyone have a better story in college football than Trinidad Chambliss? He went from playing college football at the Division II level to being just a couple plays away from taking Ole Miss to the national championship game. Threw for almost 4,000 passing yards this year, despite not starting the first two games of the season. The things that stand out to me about Chambliss the most is his ability to throw on the run, his great ability to take vertical shots downfield, and he's really clean at getting through his progressions. His best game of the season came in Ole Miss's playoff win against Georgia, in which he threw for 362 passing yards, the most ever by an Ole Miss QB in a major bowl game. While Chambliss may not be the best NFL prospect of this year's QB class, he is certainly the best QB in college football going into 2026, at least in my opinion.
Alrighty, coming at my number one spot, I also have Trinidad Winidad Chambliss. I'm all in on Trinidad, man. I think he's an excellent quarterback. This guy is one of the best playmakers in college football. He has one of those underrated arms in college football, and he's got the best story in college football. Coming over from D2 Ferris State. He spent 4 years there, and of course, last year transferred over to Ole Miss, and of course, had an incredible season en route to Ole Miss becoming a couple plays away from making the national championship. They were super close in that Miami game. They beat Georgia, Kirby Smart's Georgia team in the playoffs. That's pretty impressive. He's an all-star. He's an absolutely incredible quarterback, and I can't wait to see him in his final season of college football. As this is, of course, his fifth season, and I think he's going to absolutely ball out. and I think he's set up very nicely with Pete Golding's offense to succeed once again.
Yep. At my number 2 spot, I have Julian Sayin of the Ohio State. Is anyone shocked that I have him this high? Probably not, because there was not a quarterback in college football that was more accurate than Julian Sayin. Sayin completed 77% of his passes last season, which was good for third all time by a college football quarterback, trailing only behind Mac Jones in 2020 and Bo Nix in 2023, both of which completed 77.4% of their passes. He also throws one of the prettiest deep balls that you're ever going to see. Like, he throws such a beautiful ball. Like, it's fun to watch. Now, does him being insanely accurate have at least a little bit to do with him having Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate as his weapons? Maybe, maybe just a little bit. But that still doesn't devalue how good he is and how historically great of a season that he had. While Sayin did struggle in Ohio State's last couple of games this season, there is the fact that his offensive line was not doing the best job at protecting him last year at all. Like, they weren't prepared for the defenses in Indiana and Miami that they had to go up against, which is ultimately why Sayin struggled. But regardless of how you feel about Sayin, whether you feel he's overrated or not, there's no denying he's one of the best quarterbacks in college football. There's a reason why he was a Heisman finalist after just his first year of starting as a redshirt freshman.
Alrighty, coming to my number two, I also have Julian Sayin, the most accurate quarterback in college football. I can't believe a Michigan fan is saying the Ohio State quarterback is the most accurate quarterback in college football, but here we are, and it's absolutely true. As like Cole said, Sayin had the third highest completion percentage in FBS history behind Mac Jones and Bo Nix. He's incredible. He's got an absolutely incredible deep ball. Obviously very accurate, but he's also a very precise passer. A lot of people don't talk about. He puts a lot of great velocity on the ball. Obviously, having two great receivers with two great sets of hands with Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate is always super helpful, but it doesn't detract from all his success. He's an absolute dog, and of course, I can't wait to see him now in year two starting at the Ohio State University. Hopefully, well, hopefully not, maybe because I'm a Michigan fan, but he's gonna dominate. He's gonna cook this year. We already know he's an absolute beast.
Indeed. Just before we move on to uh, our next quarterbacks on this list, I do have one more thing to add about Trinidad Chambliss. He was robbed of being a Heisman finalist. He should have been there over Diego Pavia. I was going to say that, but it left my mind.
Yes, I agree. He should have also been a Heisman finalist over Diego Pavia. Couldn't agree more.
Anyway, for my third best quarterback in college football, I have Miami's new quarterback, Darian Mensah. After leading Duke to the ACC championship, crazy that a 7-5 team won their conference. Mensah entered the portal and then joined forces with last year's runner-ups in the Miami Hurricanes. And when you look at his stats and you look at his film, it's not really that hard to believe why Mario Cristobal wanted this guy, as Mensah led all Power Four quarterbacks last year in passing yards with 3,951, tied for the second most touchdown passes in the nation with 34. Mensah's best ability, in my opinion, is his accuracy all across the field at every level of the field. Whether it's the short game, the mid range, the long, he is accurate in all areas. Ultimately, this guy is one of the biggest reasons why I think Miami will be better this year than they were last year. And that's a very scary thing to think about.
Alrighty, coming my number three spot. Also have Darian Mensah. Dude's an absolute baller. He's got like Cole says, he's extremely accurate all across the board. Short passes, medium passes, deep passes, doesn't matter. He can throw an extremely accurate football and extremely precise football as well. He's an incredible playmaker. I'm really excited to see what he can do here now with of course Miami now with a great set of weapons, of course, including Malachi Tony, CFB 27 cover athlete, and and he also had one of the most talented freshman seasons in a while. I think he's gonna absolutely he and Mensa as a pairing are gonna absolutely explode next to each other. I think both of them are gonna put up video game numbers this year. And I can't wait to see what kind of numbers Mensa puts up. I think he'll easily be in the Heisman conversation, and I think like Cole said, I think this Miami team is going to reach new heights this year, and that is a very scary thought for the rest of the CFB world.
All right. At number 4, I have Dante Moore of the Oregon Ducks. It was honestly surprising for me that Dante Moore decided to forgo this past NFL draft and return to school for another year, as he was the projected number 2 overall pick. And I don't remember if it was unanimous. I think it was unanimous. Like, I'm pretty sure I saw on almost every draft board he was the unanimous number 2 pick behind Mendoza. But anyway, while I shared my criticism of Dante Moore in last week's episode, and I still stand on that, I think he's slightly overrated, but there's a lot to like about him, and I have some stats here that back that up that claim. As Dante Moore recorded the most big time throws by any quarterback with 30, and had and was the highest graded passer on deep throws in the nation at 98.5. Moore is also capable of making any throw from the pocket and is also elite at improvising and extending plays. Ultimately, what keeps me from putting him higher and putting him at number 1, like how many other people have him, is, I mean, how good the 3 are that are above him, is that Dante Moore's is prone to creating some disastrous turnovers, having some disastrous turnovers in big games, as in Oregon's 2 games last season versus Indiana and their playoff game last season versus Tech. He had a combined in those 3 games 7 turnovers. If Moore can fix that issue, I could easily see myself putting him higher on this list by season's end.
Alrighty. At number 4, I have Arch Manning. Now, a lot of people might expect me to put Manning a little bit higher. I still love me some Arch Manning. I think he's got an absolutely excellent arm. Yeah, he's the best pure pocket passer in college football right now. Even though he can sometimes run, I look at him as more of a pocket passer type guy, but he is an absolute beast. I love everything I saw of him. I know he had a couple rough games to begin last year, but I think he really picked up some momentum last year, especially against A&M. He really stepped up in the big moments. And I think he's going to continue to do that this year. And unfortunately, again, the bowl game against Michigan, he had an excellent showing. He had an absolute masterclass against my Wolverines. I'm excited to see what this guy can do this year. And I know, and there's a reason why Sark trusts him so much. He's He's a beast. Give me Arch Manning at number 4.
All right, at number five, call me biased, call me a homer, call me whatever you want. I do not care. I mean, if you were to call me biased or a homer, I don't know what you'd call Brian. At number 5, Arch Manning. You know, as bad as Arch looked to start the season, you could make the argument that when he got going in the second half of the season, no QB in college football looked better than number 16 in burnt orange. Despite Texas at times having a horrible offensive line, having the worst run game in Sark's tenure at Texas, and Arch's receivers not being able to catch the ball consistently, Arch still led Texas to a 10-win season and wins over 4 top 25 teams. Arch's 2 best abilities and the thing that he's most elite at is his pocket presence and his ability as a runner, as he was able to make big time plays throughout the second half of the season, despite being the 6th most pressured QB in the nation. However, with all that being said, this is the absolute highest that I can rank Arch. Now, now, if he can put together a full season of playing how he did in the back half of last season, he could easily slide up this list by season's end.
Alrighty, coming in at number 5, I have Dante Moore. Here come the boos. Here come the boos. Let me have it. I think he's a little bit overrated as well. Here's the thing. He had a couple really good games last year. He had a couple really bad games last year. There's a reason he was the number 2 rated prospect coming in, going back in January before everyone declared back to college. There was a reason why he was getting mocked at number 2 overall behind Fernando Mendoza. I get that. But here's the thing. When you made the turnovers that he made in the playoffs last year, I can't really let that slide. However, I can't deny Dante's talent. He's an extremely talented quarterback. He's got he's got a lot of great traits. He's got a lot of unique traits as well that make him such a talented quarterback and gave him that worthy recognition. But I'm sorry, he's not the best quarterback in college football, but he's most certainly the 5th best quarterback in college football.
All right, and now with that, we get into our honorable mentions. For my honorable mentions, I have CJ Carr, Gunnar Stockton, and Jaden Mayava. For CJ Carr, he could be on this list by season's end. He just needs to show me that he's capable of carrying an offensive load more throughout the entire season, now without Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price. As for Gunnar Stockton, while I think he's a good quarterback and he's good when his team needs him to be, he's honestly like a lot of other Georgia quarterbacks. He's a system QB. And as for Mayava, I mean, you can always put stock in a Lincoln Riley QB. It just depends on whether he shows up in big games because honestly, you could argue, and in fact, the stats say that he was actually worse than Dante Moore in big games.
Alrighty. I have 3 honorable mentions as well. I have CJ Carr, I have Gunnar Stockton, and I have my guy Sam Levitt. Here's the thing about CJ Carr, though. I think CJ could easily be a top 5 quarterback at the end of the year, and he could easily be a Heisman finalist at the end of the year. I'm a big CJ Carr believer. I just think that yeah, like Cole said, I need him to step up a little bit more in the passing game and be a little bit and start to put the game more into his own hands a little bit more. But like I said, I have all the faith in the world in CJ Carr to do that and rise up the draft stocks. As for Gunnar Stockton, yep, I think Gunner's a great quarterback. The only thing I will say is he's a little bit physically limited. Like I said, and being coached by Kirby Smart is like it's gonna automatically give you that like kind of like that system QB label. But I think that and unfortunately that's why I bring down Gunner a little bit. But Gunner's an incredibly talented quarterback and he's been very efficient. And then I got Sam Levitt, who I actually really like. Especially, I think he had a couple really good years in Arizona in Tempe, Arizona, with Kenny Dillingham helping him out, and now he's got Lane Kiffin helping him out in this LSU system with this great LSU O line. I think he's gonna be in for a major season.
All right, so with that all being said, that concludes another episode of the Big Game and Box Score podcast.
Yes, sir. I hope you all enjoyed this week's episode. Be sure to tune into our next week's episode where Cole and I will be covering our ACC predictions and our top 5 running backs in college football.
Man, I can't wait. Super excited. Can't wait to see you all next week. Like we said at the beginning of the video, please be sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already and like this episode if you haven't already. As always, thank you everyone for tuning in. Until next time. Peace.
Peace.